This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about something quieter and far more dangerous. It's about what happens when law stops being the center of gravity. When rules become optional, when power stops explaining itself, nothing has officially collapsed. That's the problem. Institutions still stand. Documents still exist. The language of order is still being used, but the force holding it together is gone, replaced by impulse, by discretion, by because we can. And when that happens, systems don't fall apart all at once. They drift. They misfire. They start solving the wrong problems with the wrong tools. You're told this is strength returning. You're told this is decisiveness. It feels louder than decline, so it must be safer. It isn't. Stay with me. Because to see how this works, you have to stop looking at people and start looking at the machinery. And once you see it move, you can't unsee where it's headed. What actually runs this system now is not ideology, not law, not even strategy. It's discretion. Decisions untethered from frameworks. Force detached from planning. Power operating without an operating manual. For decades, the system pretended personalities were the story. Elections, leaders, temperaments. That was the distraction. The real control mechanism shifted quietly. From rules to exceptions, from process to impulse. When law governs, power has to justify itself. When discretion governs, power only has to act. That change rewires everything. Military force stops being positioned for deterrence. Economic pressure stops being calibrated for stability. Diplomacy stops being cumulative. Everything becomes situational, reactive, transactional. And here's the dangerous part. A discretionary system doesn't feel chaotic at first. It feels flexible, efficient, strong, until every subsystem starts pulling in a different direction, until force is everywhere and nowhere it's needed. That's when misalignment stops being a flaw and becomes the operating condition. Hold on to that, because once discretion replaces law, the next shift happens slowly, and almost no one notices it happening. Before this shift, power moved slowly, deliberately, sometimes painfully. Decisions were argued over, delayed, constrained by documents, alliances, and laws that forced friction into the system. That friction wasn't weakness. It was insulation. Now compare that to now. Speed is celebrated. Instant response is treated as competence. Delay is framed as decay. What used to take months now takes days. What used to require consensus now requires a signature. What used to be debated is now announced. And because the change was gradual, it felt normal. Each step small enough to justify, each exception framed as temporary. This is how systems hollow out without alarms. Not with a rupture. With normalization, slow change is the most dangerous kind. Because people adapt faster than they object. Because institutions adjust before they resist. The language stayed the same. Security, stability, order. But the meaning shifted underneath it. What you're watching is not a break from the past. It's an acceleration of a quiet rewrite that began years ago. And once that rewrite is complete, the system doesn't fail politely. It fails all at once, starting with the moments it can no longer control. Then the shock arrives, not as a collapse, as a move, assets repositioned where they don't belong, force concentrated where it doesn't need to be, threats issued without a clear objective. On paper, it looks decisive. On maps, it looks impressive. In reality, it's a symptom, because power that's properly governed doesn't cluster randomly. It aligns with strategy, with geography, with long-term risk. A significant portion of available force is now committed to targets that don't meaningfully threaten the system. While more consequential pressures sit elsewhere, unaddressed, unplanned for. That's not strength. That's misallocation. And misallocation in a discretionary system doesn't trigger correction. It triggers doubling down. More assets, more presence, more noise. Not because it's working, but because backing away would require admitting there was no plan to begin with. You're told this is temporary, that it's calibrated, that it's under control. But control requires alignment. And alignment is already gone. Watch this moment carefully, because what comes next isn't the correction, it's the repetition. Here is the mechanism most people never see. When law is central, damage is shared. When discretion rules, damage is assigned. The system now operates by externalizing cost. Risk flows downward. Instability flows outward. Decision makers absorb none of it. Institutions absorb some of it. Civilians absorb almost all of it. Force is deployed without a strategic frame. Sanctions are applied without an end state. Threats are issued without an exit. And because nothing is anchored to law, there is no metric for success. Only motion. Who benefits? Those insulated from consequence. Those who profit from churn. Those whose power increases when systems stay permanently unresolved. Who pays? Everyone required to live inside the aftershocks. This is why misdeployment doesn't self-correct. The people who feel the failure are not the people who decide. The mechanism feeds on fear. Fear produces compliance. Compliance produces silence. And silence allows repetition. This is not accidental. It's functional. A system like this can operate for a long time, as long as the pressure remains external. But pressure never stays external forever. It travels, it rebounds, it looks for the weakest point, and the next shock exposes exactly where that point is. Now the pace changes. Faster decisions, shorter timelines, less explanation. Moves stack on top of moves before the last one is understood, before the consequences surface. Signals contradict each other. Allies hesitate. Adversaries wait. Force is present but unfocused. Threats are loud but unstable. Nothing settles. This is what acceleration looks like. Not momentum. Loss of braking. In a system governed by law, escalation triggers restraint. In a system governed by discretion, escalation triggers more escalation. Because stopping would require a reason, and reasons no longer exist. Each action narrows the next option. Each posture hardens the environment. Each move increases the cost of reversal. This is where systems become fragile, not when they're weak, but when they're overextended and convinced they're strong. You can feel it in the rhythm now. The shortening gaps, the urgency without clarity, nothing here resolves pressure. It only compresses it, and compressed pressure doesn't dissipate. It breaks. The only question left is where. This is where it reaches you. Not as a headline, as a condition. You feel it as uncertainty that never quite lifts. As policies that change without warning. As costs that rise without explanation. You are told this is the price of strength, of protection, of leadership. But what you're actually paying for is instability management. Living inside a system that no longer plans, only reacts. When law recedes, predictability goes with it. Jobs become contingent. Rights become conditional. Security becomes situational. You start adjusting your life around decisions you never see made by people you never elected to have this kind of power. Using tools that were never designed to be this blunt. This is how systemic failure becomes personal. Quietly. Incrementally. And here's the dangerous part. You are expected to normalize it, to adapt faster than the system degrades. If this feels familiar, if it feels like something you're already living inside, that's not coincidence. Stay with me. Because what happens next doesn't stop at borders. And it doesn't ask for consent. Once this condition spreads, it doesn't stay contained. Other systems start adjusting around it. Not in opposition. In anticipation, allies stop aligning by principle. They align by risk exposure. By proximity to fallout, agreements become hedges. Partnerships become temporary. Trust becomes conditional. You see it in quiet recalculations. Trade routes rerouted. Currencies diversified. Security arrangements quietly diluted. No declarations. No dramatic exits, just slow distancing. Because when a system abandons law, everyone else has to assume volatility. And volatility forces redundancy. What was once a shared framework becomes a patchwork. Everyone building buffers, everyone preparing for unpredictability. This is how a local failure becomes systemic. Not through confrontation, but through withdrawal. The world doesn't polarize immediately. It fragments, and fragmentation doesn't announce itself. It accumulates. You don't see it until coordination fails, until crises overlap, until no one is positioned to absorb shock. At that point, stability isn't broken. It's exhausted. And exhaustion is where the future starts accelerating. Without anyone fully in control of the direction, from here, the future splits not into outcomes, into trajectories. The first is adjustment. The system reintroduces limits. Not out of principle, out of necessity. Law is partially restored. Discretion is narrowed. Damage is contained, but not undone. The second is erosion. Nothing breaks. Nothing is fixed. Institutions keep functioning on paper. Power keeps operating without anchors. Instability becomes permanent background noise. Manageable until it isn't. And then there is rupture, not collapse. Collapse is slow. Rupture is sudden, a miscalculation, a response without an exit. A system already stretched, choosing speed over restraint one last time. In a discretionary order, no one is positioned to stop it. There is no brake pedal, only acceleration and silence. Which path emerges isn't decided by ideology or elections or intentions. It's decided by whether constraint re-enters the system before pressure finds the weakest joint. And here's the unresolved truth. All three paths are already visible. Simultaneously, you're not waiting for the future to arrive. You're already inside the fork. What happens next depends on which motion becomes irreversible. Nothing here ends cleanly. There is no reset button for systems that unlearn restraint. No ceremony when law loses authority. No announcement when discretion becomes doctrine. What you're watching isn't chaos. It's something more dangerous. A structure still standing, still moving, still issuing commands, but no longer capable of stopping itself. That's the warning. Because systems like this don't fail when they're challenged. They fail when they're obeyed too long. When everyone adapts just enough to keep them running, past the point where running makes sense. You will keep hearing reassurance. You will keep seeing motion mistaken for control. You will be told this is temporary. Temporary systems don't need constant escalation. If you want to understand what comes after this, not the headlines, not the personalities, but the mechanics, you have to keep watching. Keep questioning. Keep tracing where constraint disappeared, because the most dangerous moment isn't collapse. It's the moment just before, when the system still works and no one can make it stop. If this mattered to you, stay here. The next piece goes deeper.